Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a Husqvarna 223L string trimmer. The customer complaint is that it just doesn't run right. It won't stay running. Something's definitely wrong with it. Unusable. So we pulled out the foam air filter. I mean, it wasn't plugged up. They tend to start deteriorating though. And you want to get them replaced before they deteriorate so far that they're getting sucked into the carburetor. The easiest way to work on these things, even if you're just removing a spark plug, is to pull these 3 screws out of here and lift this whole cylinder cover off of the engine. Now things are quite easily accessible. Look at that, this spark plug wasn't even loose, or wasn't even tight. And that alone could explain a lot of the reason why it didn't want to run right. Taking a look into the cylinder, we're looking for clean and shiny. And that's what we find. There's nothing wrong. There's probably no air leaks. Let's check for a spark. Yeah, it's got spark. Let's look inside that fuel tank. Needs a big sniff. I mean, it doesn't smell bad. But you know what we find a lot of times is that they'll let old fuel sit in the tank, and then come spring, throw some fresh gas over the top of it, and it's a little deceiving. I mean, look at the stuff that's in that heat funnel right now from the last repair. That's some dark fuel. So we've got the filter hanging out, and we've got our new filter ready to go. But before we put it on there, we're going to pressure test this fuel line and the carburetor itself. Just put a pressure gauge on here, put 10 pounds of pressure on it. And it's holding. That means there's no holes in the fuel line or leaks in the carburetor. So what are we going to do now? Going to put some fuel in it. I think the plan here should be to see if it runs. I mean, we got a clean cylinder, we got spark, we just put fresh fuel in it. If it doesn't run, it probably needs some carb work. So let's see what we got. That cap doesn't thread on there very well. It's getting to be an older machine. I don't know, the threads are probably bunged up. Spin in a new spark plug in, torque it down to spec. That looks good. Let's see if this thing's going to run. Priming it up. Prime's decent. Choke it. I mean, technically it ran, but I can see how the customer was complaining that it's unusable. A quick look at the spark arrestor screen. That looks like it's alright. So, we're digging into the carburetor. There's a screw on the top in the air filter box, and then there's 2 screws in the front that run through that air filter holder and through the carburetor to the manifold. We'll pull those longer screws out, exposing our carburetor. And you'll notice right away that there's no gasket on this side of the carburetor. That's because it fell immediately. So you got to remember to recover that. Took our throttle linkage off. It's just a Z-bend end on it. And now we're going to take off the short fuel line that runs from the primer bulb to the carburetor. and now the main fuel line. And I'm grabbing a stopper here for that line. I really should have loosened that cap. Just because there's going to be fuel pressure on this line. But it's a rubber line, not a Tygon line, so I'll be able to pinch it and keep it from squirting all over the place, and then put a stopper in it. There we go. We'll just set that aside and take a look at this carburetor. So I know I'm going to want to put a kit in it. This is a Zama C1Q EL24. I just look up that number and find the corresponding kit. And there we have it. Let's take a look at the metering diaphragm. 2 screws holding the cover on. And we find it's pretty darn stiff. Not hard and clicky kind of stiff, but stiff enough it probably doesn't move the way it's supposed to, which would explain the way it was running. So, we're going to look at this micro screen in the carburetor. I don't really see any issues with that. What are we looking for? A razor blade. I don't know why I'm not using the carb stand on here. I think it's a little bit older video. So we're going to put our fuel pump on and then our fuel pump gasket. Get it all lined up nice and pretty. Wrong cover, dude. Peel the old gaskets off the pump cover. Kind of holding the throttle open a little bit because the pump cover's got the idle stop screw on it. And it just kind of interferes while you're trying to line things up. So on the metering lever side, we're going to put a new needle in it. I'm just spraying a little carb clean on the old needle on the tip of it just to clean it off. Sometimes there's like rubber preservatives on that. They can gunk things up on you. So I'm hanging the, here's where we're putting a spring in, hanging a needle on the metering lever, dropping it in place. Can't see none of it because my fingers are in the way. Sliding the cross shaft over underneath the screw and then tightening the screw down. Then I want to check the metering lever height. On this carburetor, the metering lever should be flush with the sides of the carburetor. And if it's not, we just bend it a little bit and adjust it so that it is. First goes down our gasket and then our metering diaphragm. And then we'll put the cover on it. 2 screws to hold it in place. Alright, let's get this carburetor back on the trimmer. First I'm going to put the fuel line on. So pinching the line, pulling the plug, and pushing the line onto the carburetor. And we'll kind of line things up a little bit and put that short fuel line on the primer bulb. Well, I didn't replace the line because it felt pretty good, but the end of it had a bit of a memory, and I wanted it to push decent onto that primer bulb, so I just snipped about 1/8 of an inch or so off the end of that line. Now we're recovering that gasket I told you about before that we lost. And we're just going to wipe the schmutz off of it. Now the easiest way to put this back together is running the bolts through the air filter holder, then the carburetor, and then hanging the gasket on the end of those bolts. Now you can push the whole thing up to the manifold and thread it in. Just double checking to make sure that the gasket stayed on. Looks good, so we'll tighten it down. You're running into plastic here, so don't get carried away. Maybe power tools aren't the right choice for you. I don't know. Let's put this throttle cable back into the holder and then attach it to the carburetor. I got to route it underneath this fuel line here. The cable's got a Z-bend in it. We just got to push it through the hole in the throttle shaft. You got to open the throttle a little bit to create enough slack to do that. So let's prime this thing up and see if it's going to run. And if it does, that's all I'm going to have for you on the Husqvarna 223 string trimmer. It just didn't run right. Thanks for watching. Later.